Hi, I'm David Freudberg, host of Humankind. I've been thinking a lot lately about civility. Of course, basic politeness and exercising good manners is essential, but I think civility, real civility, goes deeper. It means to choose our words carefully and thoughtfully in non-hurtful ways. It means to be respectful of how another person sees the world even when we heartily disagree. And to maintain a sense of humility, because as a wise friend of mine used to say, we could always be wrong. These are lofty goals which I practice imperfectly, of course, but that's the tone we strive for in these programs. Thank you for listening. This Humankind special is produced in association with WGBH Boston and the BTS Center, and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and grants from the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation.
When you are listening, you are sensitive to the unshed tear. You're sensitive to the skip beat that occurs there. You're sensitive to the anguished sort of cry that is not expressed. I think that listening, as I've grown more experienced in medicine, I've become to realize that of all the things in medicine, that's the most difficult. It's as complex as learning to be a great violinist.
The quiet, powerful act of listening as practiced by attentive doctors, counselors, and clergy. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. The wise Buddhist monk from Vietnam, Thich Nhat Hanh, has observed that deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. For many of us, listening is the most basic act of friendship, and it can mean so much when we carve out quiet space really to hear out the other person. Professor George Fichette at the Department of Preventive Medicine at Rush University in Chicago.
I think we all have had experiences of being distressed or frightened, being worried, when we were by ourselves and our minds were just spinning and didn't have anyone to listen to us. And then had an opportunity to have a good friend listen and understand, and not interrupt, and not give advice, and not correct, and not challenge.
And hearing people out, even when we differ with them, is a way of acknowledging their essential human dignity.
I think actually one of the greatest acts of generosity is to be able to listen to another person without judgment, without getting your own views, opinions, and biases in the way.
Joan Borisenko is a cell biologist trained at Harvard Medical School. She has published widely on the mind-body connection and today practices as a spiritual director in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
It's a very generous act to give people the time, the space, the mindful attention for them to be able to say whatever is on their mind. And essentially, one of the characteristics of us mammals, us listening, mammals, is the deep desire to connect. That attachment to another human being is a very important characteristic, or if you're a lion, your connection to another lion. But mammals are configured to require connection to be healthy and to be happy and to be listened to with that kind of generous compassion. What it does is it activates what's called the affiliation systems in the brain, the emotions that connect us. Those are activated, and you can feel it immediately in your body. The body starts to react, and the body becomes happy or focused, or depends on the emotion, but there's no stress. They're all a feeling, really, of deep connection.
So is this your experience when you feel genuinely listened to?
Absolutely. It makes me feel grateful. It makes me feel actually very loving and loving toward that person for their generosity. I think when I'm listened to deeply, which you're doing right now, I relax and I move out of the stressful part of myself, the part that maybe wants to defend something, and into a part of me that has the courage simply to be honest, to be present, and to be myself.
I think that what's important is creating the state of being in which it's actually possible to listen, first of all, to yourself, and then to another human being.
And that means a frame of mind in which the listener intentionally enters a practice of self-reflection to quiet the restless mind and grant a measure of calm to the body. Psychiatrist James Gordon at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C.
All the different forms of meditation are ultimately devices, ways of coming into a state of relaxed moment-to-moment awareness. And that state is really the precondition for listening to anybody, let alone listening to anybody with compassion. Because if you're anxious and agitated, you're very busy hearing your own thoughts, your own concerns. You're not really able to focus on someone else. So I think this is the missing ingredient for coming into that state of being able to be with another human being.
Dr. Gordon is clinical professor in psychiatry and family medicine at Georgetown University Medical School. He's the author most recently of Unstuck. Dr. Gordon leads mind-body programs intended to heal the whole person for traumatized children and their families facing crisis. He spends a lot of time listening to what people are going through.
What I see is people who are often dispirited by the conditions that they're living through. So whether it's somebody who's dealing with a diagnosis of cancer, or somebody who's been through a terrible collective tragedy like the hurricanes in Puerto Rico or the shootings in Broward County at Stoneman Douglas, they feel demoralized, dispirited. They have a sense that the rug of life has been pulled out from under them, and they don't know who or what to trust and to have faith in anymore.
A certain sense of abandonment?
Abandonment often by the universe. Who am I? What can I count on anymore? I mean, they feel lost often. They feel that the structures that sustained their lives, or just in Puerto Rico, and a guy in one of the towns on the countryside, one of the sort of deputy mayor, was telling us about how during the hurricane, many people went, this is not a psychiatric word, but they went mad, really. They didn't know what to do. They were running around. They couldn't communicate with people in their family. They didn't know how to help. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do. And they just kind of lost themselves.
Crisis can be profoundly disquieting. And in some cases, it comes without warning, like the horrific school gunfire that erupted at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida in 2018, leaving 34 dead and wounded.
Unfortunately, I lost 2 people in my class and 6 were hit. I was on the wrong side of the class, and no student should have to cover themselves with a deceased classmate to survive. But I was that student.
People in these scenes are hurting.
We observe people in that condition, sometimes right after a catastrophe, or in the case of working in the middle of the war, in the middle of that catastrophe, and we help them come back to themselves. We help them quiet their biology using meditation or biofeedback. We help them shake loose the tension and stress in their bodies with active techniques like shaking and dancing or fast, deep breathing. And then we help them access their imagination and their intuition. And so they ask themselves, what we may use something like a wise guide image, where people imagine going to a safe and comfortable place and imagining that a guide comes to them who can help answer questions. And then we leave it to them to ask the questions that are of importance to them. And sometimes there are questions that seem very mundane, like, how do I get enough food to eat, but very important for the next week. And sometimes it is, how do I regain my faith? How do I live after the death of my father or my son or my daughter? So we encourage them to find their own pathway to sort of understanding and connection, and to any spiritual beliefs or forces or experiences that can sustain them. We open the door for them.
So when someone feels that a terrible event has shaken their faith, or in some cases may have caused them to feel like they've lost their faith, how do you as a caregiver approach that and help them?
Well, first of all, I relax. So I'm not trying to impose anything. I think it was Keats who talked about an irritable reaching after fact. And I think there's an irritable reaching after fact that we have in our mental health and our health professions. And I resist it. I'm not trying to define anybody. I'm trying to let them be and create a space for them to share and talk about and explore and ask and request what they need. So in order to do that, once again, I need to relax and be present with them no matter how overwhelming the situation is. And then they will help me see how I can be of help to them. And I have to get over my own sense of being overwhelmed or despairing.
Can it be traumatic for you as the provider to go into a situation where everybody around you is reeling in the wake of some horrible development?
Well, it's definitely unsettling. And what I've learned to do is to relax with it. And the people in those situations have often taught me how to do that. I'll just tell you one story. I was in, goes back a long time, 18 years or so. We've been working in Kosovo with people who were traumatized both during the war in 1998, 1999, and then after the war.
Based on refugee accounts, war crimes, including burning of homes, forcible displacement, and summary executions, were committed by Serbian forces against Kosovar Albanians. Some civilians landed in refugee camps.
I have father sick,
Yes.
mother sick. My sister has 4 children.
All sick.
Three nights, no.
Yes.
Look,
What can I do?
in Tirana I have family. No problem. Look,
Yeah.
children sick, 4 children.
And I came back after the war was over, and we began to work in a region called Suareka, where 80% of the homes had been destroyed, and 20% of the kids in the high school where we were doing a lot of work had lost one or both parents. And one day, one of the high school teachers whom we had trained brought me up to visit this old couple who were living way up in the mountains on a farm, and just in the middle of nowhere. It took us an hour to get there, and outside of Suareka, which itself was rural. So we finally arrive, and there are a bunch of burnt-out buildings, and there's a compound, a kind of a rectangle of a compound with a number of buildings. And there's one building that survived, and sitting on the porch are a very old couple. And they have a little oil lamp, and you can see the burn marks everywhere. And they invite Murati, who's the teacher, and my colleague Tina and I to sit down, and we sit with them, and they begin, somehow they, miraculously, in the midst of this wasted territory, they make some coffee for us, and they serve us coffee. So we're sitting there drinking the coffee, and they tell us the story of how they watched 21 members of their family massacred. Children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, all of whom lived in the compound, by Serbian paramilitaries, and then watched the animals also be slaughtered. And I'm sitting there sort of really quite overwhelmed by what they're telling me. And I say I'm so honored that you would tell me what has happened to you, and that you would share this with me. And I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply moved by this terrible tragedy. So I wish there's something that I could do for you. And they looked at me, and both of them, it was done through a translator, and they then started smiling. And they said, "Oh, Dr. Gordon, we are so happy to have you here. We know that you are listening to us, and we know that you are going to share our story with others. And that is all we could hope for. That's all we want."
We're exploring how the profound practice of listening to people in distress can promote healing and help to restore their sense of wholeness. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. To learn more and to obtain an audio download or CD of this segment entitled Listeners, please visit humanmedia.org. There's a kind of mystery in sitting calmly, patiently, attentively, and tuning into someone else's experience, someone else's story and life journey. Reverend John Harrison is chaplain and director of spiritual care at El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California, near San Jose.
I think that the act of listening is a sacred act that requires us to empty ourselves of ourselves so that we can be fully present to another. Active listening is not waiting for one's turn to speak.
And what does it mean to be fully present to another?
It means that you're putting their needs, their wants, their interests above your own. To be fully present means that one is willing to put down one's own cares to care about another.
For those serving in healthcare facilities, a typical workday, even when hectic, offers moments when staff can pause, however briefly, for reflection.
We have a thing where we call it gelling in and gelling out. It's really just the proper cleansing of one's hands. That's a perfect opportunity to begin the process of not only cleansing your hands, but also cleansing your minds. As you're there, either at the sink or whether you're using this magic gel that they give us.
Hand sanitizer.
That's right. To take that time to offer up a prayer to the God of your understanding. Take that time to empty yourself of your commute to work, of your child who has just lost their minds, of whatever might be an obstacle. Just take that time while you're cleansing your hands to consciously clear your mind and set the proper stage, because I suggest that it's better to not pay a visit to someone who could potentially be in need if you're not available to completely and fully hear them. You're better off balancing your checkbook and clearing your mind. I once called on a gentleman who was a patient in the hospital, knocked on the door, introduced myself as we are taught to do, shared with them that I was from the spiritual care department, and if he was interested and available, I'd offer myself for a brief visit. And he looked at me. He was a crusty, salty type of guy. He looked like the kind of gentleman that you would imagine that would have a corncob pipe stuck in between his teeth. He narrowed his eyes, squinted, and he said, "Chaplain, God. I don't want to talk about God." And I took a breath and I said, "Fantastic. I've been talking about God all day. What would you like to talk about? He looked at me. He didn't really smile, but I think that the smile was there. He says, well, come in if you want. Sit down here. I'm watching the game on the mounted television in the room. Now, as quiet as it's kept, I don't really like sports. But it was an invitation, and I took it, and I sat down. And he was staring at the TV, so I did the same. I didn't look at him. I put my focus where his focus was. And after an eternity of 7 minutes, he said, life stinks. And one of the most brilliant conversations I've ever had about life and the meaning of life arose, and we never once invoked the name of a deity. As we were talking, he said, look out there. Do you see that tree? I said, yeah, I do, sir. I see it. He said, wait a minute. He said, there, do you see that? And it was a bird. I don't know what type of bird it was. It was a large bird. He says, every day that I see that bird, I know I'll make it through this day. I mean, it was a profound thing. If I would have spent my time looking to hear the buzzwords from a particular religious zip code, I would have missed what brought meaning to him. He's saying that if he knows that the creatures of nature are sustained by an entity greater than themselves, that there is something that was going to help him make it through the day. So I look to find out what's important to one by way of their faith, however they want to describe it, no matter what it is, Christian, Buddhist, Islam, Wiccan, whatever it is. Then, once I understand what their faith is, their interest is, then I'm looking for the importance of it. Is it something that's deeply and profoundly meaningful for them, or is it something that they remember from their childhood and it arises in times of stress and turmoil? I'm also interested in their community. Do they have a community? Is their community a community of faith, or is it a community of practice? Is their community rooted in their family, friends? Are they homeless in the community, or are those who share the struggles of the street with them? Or are they truly without community? And then the final thing would be, after hearing those three things, what would I assess my response should be? What actions, if any, should I follow up in order to be of assistance to them?
Here's Irene Harris, a psychologist at the Minneapolis Veterans Administration healthcare system. She's also on the faculty in counseling and psychiatry at the University of Minnesota.
Deep listening is about emptying myself and allowing the person to whom I am listening to guide the conversation, to show me what is important, to show me what the goals are, and to release that person to discover more about themselves and their context.
In fact, says Irene, she attempts to make sure the conversation is not about her. What she brings to the encounter is her training in how to be a skilled listener.
I will say that the times in my life that I have had more struggles as a person while practicing as a therapist have forced me to strengthen that skill.
Of course, the personal lives of professional listeners like Irene Harris inevitably seep into their work lives. So part of her training at the VA is to establish clear boundaries between what's related to the veteran she's serving and what's not. And by focusing on the human being she's helping, it keeps it fresh with a sense of purpose and meaning.
There are a number of things that I do. One of them is that I just get used to really looking forward to the time that I spend with my clients. I take great joy in what I discover about people as I am working with them on exploring their experience and helping them find ways to recover. And I don't want that joy to be interrupted by anything about me. I'm having too much fun to let other things intrude. Another thing that I do to keep my listening pure is my own spiritual practice. So generally speaking, before a client comes in to see me, even though I have been practicing since the mid-1990s, I still pray before I see clients. I don't think anybody around me knows that I do that. I often don't even bow my head or close my eyes, but I am always looking to what is divine within me to help me approach my client with what in Christian practice we refer to as agape, the love, respect, and dignity we give to every person because every person is in some way an expression of what is divine.
Are you asking for God's guidance?
What I am looking for when I pray that prayer is an empowerment to my own clarity and my own very deliberately conscious belief in the profound value and dignity of every human being.
Very hard at times to do that?
I can remember on one occasion in particular, I worked with a client for probably 2 years, seeing that client weekly. And that client found occasion to trash the religious group of which I was a member every single session.
Is that called pressing your buttons?
I would say that that is pressing my buttons. He had no idea that that was my group. And I worked really hard at seeing what was going on for him, how he perceived that group as being hurtful to him. And while I might have been of the opinion that that was a misperception, it was very much beside the point of why he was seeing me. And I needed to consult a supervisor and get some clarity about, do I bring this up as a therapeutic issue? Is it sufficiently related to this client's goals that it's something that I need to address? And as we looked for the client's goals in that interaction, it really wasn't a piece of what he was coming to me for.
Psychologist Irene Harris at the Minneapolis Veterans Administration healthcare system, along with other caregivers, experienced in deep listening. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Doug Sugarts. Editorial assistance from Andrew Andresco, Ken Rogers, Maggie Mantis, Kathy Graham, and David Cruz. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Connie Goldman and to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with the BTS Center.
You can hear more episodes of our series at humankindpodcast.org. That's humankindpodcast.org.
This segment, entitled Listeners, Part 1, is Humankind Program number 266.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. Please subscribe to our free weekly podcast. The title is Humankind on Public Radio. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcast services, as well as through our website. Again, the podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you'd like to support our program, please visit humankindpodcast.org, and at the top, click on How You Can Help. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Freudberg, and I'm on a mission. Since I was a high school intern in public radio back in NPR's first year on the air, I've devoted my working life to seeking out and disseminating knowledge that I hope will be enlightening and will benefit the lives of our listeners. But the grants we get, the generous support provided from foundations and some others, simply don't cover all our expenses. And if you like what you hear, we're asking for your help so we can keep this going. Please visit humanmedia.org, and at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Thanks. This Humankind special is produced in association with WGBH Boston and the BTS Center and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and grants from the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation.
Our world has become an ever noisier place. Physically noisy, the noise in cities, the noise in restaurants, the noise all around us, the noise of our own minds, of so many distractions, so many possible inputs.
The clamor around and within us, and ways to quiet down so we're available to hear out others. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. With our phones and all the other sound-emitting devices, plus the various noises at home, on the road, at work, the relentless din of modern life can seem deafening. Some relief in the form of quiet time is essential, especially for anyone wishing to get inwardly silent enough to truly listen to others. Best-selling author Joan Borisenko, based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, studies the mind-body connection.
We need to have a way to carve out some silence in our own lives. And the two things that cross-culturally have been found most important to calm people down, make a little quiet place, is number one, nature. To spend some time in nature whenever possible. And number two, listening to calming music. That those two things really help. They calm down the nervous system, they calm down the brain. And we each have a different thing that calms us. So to identify what is it for you that allows your body to relax and your mind to become a little quieter, and to make sure that you spend at least a few minutes a day in that pursuit. And that way, I think you help to become part of the solution instead of adding to the problem.
But for many of us, actually setting aside quiet time can be hard. There are all the constructive uses we could be putting to that time. How often do we simply have nothing left to do? But there may be another factor in why we resist settling into quietude. Reverend John Harrison is a hospital chaplain in El Camino, California.
Many people are uncomfortable with silence because they're uncomfortable with themselves. To be in silence means that one is amplifying the voices that are within one's own head, be they inner critical voices. And I think many people are uncomfortable with that. I think many people are uncomfortable with the unknown. To be in a room with someone who is going through a serious illness or grief or loss, the tendency is to fill up the room with sound, because then you have some degree of control over what's going on.
And is it better not to have control?
I don't know to what extent control is ours. That brings me back to the distinction between being with someone and doing for someone. If the patient or the person that I'm with is uncomfortable with the silence, that's one thing. But if they're content with it, and they're actually happy just to have me there, well, why fill up that precious time and space with useless sounds, rhetoric that has little meaning? that could be the very space that the divine wants to speak, and there's no room.
Could be drowning it out.
Absolutely.
It's easy to feel awkward when silence somehow dawns during a social encounter. It can make us anxious and antsy, unsure of what to do. I find it interesting just to notice the various impulses and thoughts that crop up in my mind at those moments. Anything to avoid just sitting still. Joan Borisenko.
And that's why what are called self-regulation strategies are so important. To be able to learn, the simplest technique is to just take a big breath in through your nose till you're really filled with breath, and breathe out slowly. That slows the movement of the breath, and that actually stimulates the vagus nerve within the body, the part of your nervous system called rest and digest that makes you peaceful. So we all need these strategies. That's what meditation is about. It helps you in the moment, even though you're not meditating in the moment, because you've had a sense of what it is to be peaceful. Often you follow your breath in meditation as something to focus on. And if you do that, then when you find yourself going nuts internally, you can say to yourself, okay, going crazy over here, gotta take a few breaths, gotta let go. And that helps, but it does take practice.
Joan Borisenko has been influenced by the late British-born author Taylor Caldwell, who wrote a book entitled The Listener. It tells the story of a simple building with an inscription above the door, "The Man Who Listens." He's a mysterious figure behind a closed curtain, who reveals himself only to those who request it. People from different walks of life, many coping with life's travails, come for his compassionate listening, a theme that resonated with Joan.
I worked in a hospital at that time with people who were really ill.
Reading the book helped inspire her to serve patients in a vulnerable position.
My experience was that I liked to be able to be there when people were approaching death. And in the beginning, I thought, what do I have to say to them that would give them solace and comfort? And in a short period of time, I realized Taylor Caldwell was right. People just need to be listened to. And I recognized I don't have to say anything at all. I can just greet them and say, here I am. We can sit together, and that's it. And then either people would speak or not speak, but such a sense of peace would pervade the room. And I think that's another misunderstanding about listening. People often feel, I have to have something smart to say, instead of realizing that, my goodness, just being a safe space for someone is the most important thing.
Right, because we sometimes feel like we're inadequate if we haven't provided helpful advice.
Exactly. Yes, we're a culture that is very big on doing and not so big on the joy and the importance of just being.
And one of the impediments to just being is the very human tendency to get distracted, which can happen even when we have a sincere intention to listen compassionately to another. We become absorbed in a demanding situation at work or worry over a personal problem, and we lose focus. Psychologist Irene Harris with the Minneapolis Veterans Administration healthcare system.
We are in a culture that values time, values productivity, values work, and especially in healthcare, we have productivity requirements that we have to meet, and a fair amount of paperwork that always has to be done.
Be it electronic or otherwise.
Right. And so, yes, the challenge that I often have when I'm going to sit down with a veteran and really focus on that veteran so that I don't find myself thinking about anything except what that veteran is saying, and what my training in how to listen and how to facilitate that veteran's own exploration of his or her experience can be. The other challenge that we have as listeners is to turn off the self-evaluative monitor. Am I doing a good job or not? That little piece that the Buddhist teachers refer to as monkey mind, where the idea is hopping all around and am I good enough? Am I doing this well enough? The sort of imposter phenomenon that affects almost everybody who's ever chosen to get a graduate level education, because that sense of I know I needed to achieve to be worth something is part of what drives us to be there. But that piece of worrying about oneself is something that we have to find a way to turn off and make this interaction not about what a great therapist I am, but to make this interaction about the inherent spiritual value and dignity and worth of the person who is coming to us for help.
And for caring professionals, that, of course, is the essential focus: service to the person in need. But it's so easy for our attention to get diverted, especially in this age of instant gratification devices, which are practically engineered to play into our modern malady of attention deficit, and all manner of other concerns that could sidetrack us. But psychiatrist James Gordon in Washington says for professional listeners, that's the challenge.
Well, if you're distracted, you're not doing your job. So the point is, if you find your mind wandering, this is where meditation, once again, becomes so important. If you find yourself being distracted, you take a couple deep breaths and you come back and be present again. And distraction may happen. Now, distraction will either tell you that there's something going on with you and you need to remedy that, or sometimes it tells you somebody is saying the same thing for the 20th or 30th time, and you need to do something else. Because people get stuck like like a needle in the groove of one of those old-time vinyl records, and they keep going over the same thing over and over again, and it's not serving them. So at that point, that's a signal. Come back and tune in a little more closely and see what might be appropriate in this moment.
And also to follow certain focusing practices, such as meditation?
Well, it's all about meditation. I mean, the idea is that what we call meditation, these are just techniques. There are we worship, or to use that old-timey word, fetishize these techniques. Oh, it's the technique, it's this. The techniques are just means to an end. The Zen Buddhists talk about fingers pointing at the moon. Each meditation technique is just another finger pointing at the moon. The idea of all these techniques, as far as I'm concerned, in all the traditions, is to live your life in this state of relaxed moment-to-moment awareness. So every encounter is an opportunity for me to move into that meditative state. And if I'm being distracted, come back, buddy. Be present.
And not to beat yourself up for having been distracted.
Right. I mean, that's also another, another way of avoiding being present is beating yourself up. One blow is enough, and then come back.
We're exploring the practice of listening with professional caregivers who listen for a living, you could say, who strive to give their undivided attention to those they serve. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. To learn more and to obtain an audio download or CD of this segment entitled Listeners, please visit humanmedia.org. So far, we've examined how a person, whether as a professional listener or just a friend, can settle in and really tune in to another human being. But what would it mean to listen to oneself? Joan Borisenko, author of Minding the Body, Mending the Mind, writes about brain science and the mind-body connection.
I would say that mindfulness is the act of listening to oneself.
Explain.
And that is to be able to sit quietly and develop what's actually, the technical phrase is meta-awareness. And that is to be able to listen to your own thoughts, to be conscious of your own thoughts. So let me give you an example of that, David. If you go to a movie, you know how it is if it's a scary movie. If you're really fused with the movie, you get scared and react. But maybe at some point you take a breath and you say, oh wait, that's just a movie. And then you're not so reactive. Well, we can do the same thing with our thoughts. We all believe the stories that we tell ourselves. And sometimes they're pretty scary stories.
And sometimes they're very distorted.
They're very distorted, like we're our own personal terrorists, what goes on in terms of the fearful mind and the anxious mind. And there sure is a lot of fear and anxiety in the world today. But if we're fused with it, we're just reacting, our whole body-mind system. But if we can say, but wait, I'm going to take a breath and just notice what am I thinking? How does it affect my body? And is it really true? Can I back up from that? It's just a story that I'm telling myself. Or even if you're really afraid to say, well, I feel the feelings of fear in my body. And if you allow yourself to just feel what is, really listen to yourself, notice what is, what happens is it loses some of its grip on you. Pain gets less, anxiety gets less. And that's all about listening to yourself. You also have choice. Let's say I'm listening to myself. I'm telling myself a story. Nobody loves me. I'm going to go eat worms. That's the commonest story, where people think, oh, nobody likes me. I'm going to be abandoned.
And then people decide on a diet of worms?
That's right. It's not good for the health. But if you notice that, like, here it is. There's the inner critic. It's doing its thing again. And just label it. Do you know that actually has an effect of calming down the fear center of the brain? It calms down the amygdala when you can simply name what's happening. And then you realize, wait a minute, no one is rejecting me at this moment. I'm just sitting here, and that's just a story that I tell myself. And to have a choice in how to feel or how to behave, before we have choice, we have to have awareness. We have to notice what's going on in there. And that's what self-listening is all about. It gives us awareness and opens up choice.
That's a very powerful statement. Before we have choice, we need self-awareness. Because otherwise we're kind of being hijacked by our feelings?
We're hijacked. We're fused with our emotions. We're fused with our thoughts. We mistake them for reality. And it's amazing, the stories that we tell ourselves, very unpleasant ones. I'm fascinated by the effect of narrative on our health and on our emotional well-being, because it's enormous.
It's pretty easy to lose track of the stories we tell ourselves. We might like to play the victim, or blow things way out of proportion, or blame others when the fault is our own. And these stories are often part of a pattern, a kind of anthology of false narratives we recite to ourselves. So it can become a dreamscape, and one that can harm us. Joan Borisenko, who today practices as a spiritual director, helps people learn and grow into their spiritual lives.
I always ask people in the beginning of a session, would you like to pray? And if so, should we pray together, or would you like to pray by yourself? And then we go into silence. And we stay in silence until whoever it is that I'm with is ready to break the silence and begin the session. So we're trying to drop into that holy listening, where not only are we present to each other, but we feel the presence of a third, of something larger that's holding us.
So, are you consciously consulting, asking that source for guidance in the process of your quest to be of help to
Absolutely.
the person?
Absolutely. And often, my own prayer, which I say before we get on the session, is for that divine presence to come and bring us both into its presence so that we can be guided, so that we can be awake together, so that we can follow the trail of breadcrumbs back to our true self, our authentic self, our heart, and know what it is that we're being led to next on our journey. So I always think God leaves a trail of breadcrumbs. And Rosemary Doherty, the nun who was my spiritual director for a time, said, what you have to do is follow the vector of love. I loved that. The vector of love. Where is love moving in your life? Pay attention to that. And, normally we pay attention to where the vector of fear is leading in our life because we're wired for that. The brain does that.
So, how can we flip that from following the vector of fear to following the vector of love?
We have to become aware. We have to wake up. It's about intention and attention and start to look for the good.
Whether in the role of a caring friend or loved one or a professional, many people feel the help they render is not entirely of their own making. Instead, they're serving some higher purpose and drawing strength from that. And in difficult caregiving situations, do I keep intervening or step back? Do I reveal a blunt truth or be more subtle? Staying aligned with that sense of purpose can shed light on appropriate ways to proceed.
I know that when I'm baffled, I need to surrender. And I'm surrendering to the universe, to God, to surrendering, giving up my expectations, my beliefs, my roles, and just being present. So it's really a question of letting go. And, I know in AA they talk about letting go, letting God. It's not bad. I don't know that I would always call it, occasionally I've called it God, but I sometimes say just whatever guidance is available, whether it's coming from my own intuition, my own imagination, my unconscious, the collective unconscious, the universe, God, the Great Spirit, whoever or whatever it is, I want to be open to it. And so I do practices like guided imagery, where I ask my wise guide, whoever or whatever that might be, and it's different. I mean, when a dragonfly appears, is it God? Perhaps. Perhaps it's a manifestation of my unconscious. Perhaps it's God appearing to me in that form. And I've learned to pay attention to whatever form it appears in, to not have any preconceptions about who or what I'm asking.
Do you feel that you have a guide to whom there is some kind of direct access?
I have many guides who appear, usually, when I open myself and I ask them to come. They appear and they answer my questions, and sometimes they sound like I'm grew up in New York, and I'm Jewish, and I used to go to Jewish delicatessens on the Lower East Side, and sometimes they sound like one of the waiters in Ratner's, who knows exactly what I should be eating, even though I may have come in wanting matzo ball soup. He's like, you want a corned beef sandwich, and they have that kind of edge to them. Sometimes they're very compassionate. The guide is. Sometimes the guide will just tell me to relax and take a few deep breaths and ask again. So I've learned to trust whoever or whatever it is who comes and not to worry about naming it, just to allow myself to be available to what's beyond my mere intellect.
But there is some kind of source of wisdom.
There is something. There's something more than me. All you need to do is stand in a hurricane to understand that there's something more. You know, I'll tell you, recently we've been working with the Lakota people on Pine Ridge Reservation.
Native Americans.
In South Dakota, Native Americans. And we've been helpful to them dealing with issues of suicide and depression, and they've been very helpful to me and to all of our team in helping us to reconnect with the earth and the wisdom of nature and the teachings that come from the earth and the sky and the wind and the water and the four directions. So it's just all these different ways of accessing this sort of colossal but also intimate and perennial wisdom. And for me, it has different names and different appearances at different times, different places. And it's helpful, which is the most important thing. You know, it's what William James spoke of life affirming. It's life affirming for me.
And there are other subtle benefits from the practice of listening to people in need, as a compassionate companion or as a professional caregiver.
Often, those who we provide care to really they serve to be a mirror, a reflection of ourselves.
John Harrison, the chaplain at El Camino Hospital in Northern California.
There's always a danger in seeing too much of oneself in another, and yet if one is able to listen attentively to another as they share their concerns, their fears, their frustrations, their joys, their hurts, their pains, and then untangle these issues like one would untangle a ball of thread that's just a confusion. As you're an active participant in this, you often get to see one of your own threads in that ball. Answers to questions that one holds for themselves can be found in the experiences of others.
I find this over and over and over. That something I'm going through, someone else will describe to me. And I marvel at that. Wow, look at the synchronicity of that. What were the odds of that? And then I realize that in my reaction to their situation, I'm clarifying my reaction to my own situation.
That's it. And I don't believe that any of us are meant to be in isolation. It's about community.
Which brings us full circle in the experience of open-hearted listening to be of service to someone in need. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Doug Sugarts. Editorial assistance from Andrew Andresco, Ken Rogers, Maggie Mantis, Kathy Graham, and David Cruz. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Connie Goldman and to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with the BTS Center.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5LISTEN. That's 1-800-5LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
And you can subscribe to our new series, The Spiritual Care Podcast. It's free at Apple Podcasts and elsewhere. This segment, entitled Listeners, is Humankind Program number 267.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.
To hear more episodes of Humankind, you can subscribe to our free podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast player. A new episode each week. The podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you enjoy this program, be sure to leave us a kind review at iTunes and Stitcher. If you want to support the program, please visit humanmedia.org. And at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Again, our web address is humanmedia.org. Thanks.